Hello, and welcome to the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation's Congressional Town Hall. I'm Mike Henry, PBTF's Director of Advocacy. Today's event is focused on the Data for Pediatric Brain Cancer Act. During this town hall, you will learn more about the bill's content, its impact on research efforts, and why it's important to our patient families. Today's speakers include Congressional Childhood Cancer Co-Chair Representative Ami Bera, Drs. Ashley Margol and Michael Prados, representing the Pediatric Neuro-Oncology Consortium, Rachel Kreiger, who's a patient caregiver and founder of Ollie's Orchestra, and finally, Harsh Patel, who is Representative Bera's Health Policy Advisor. A few programming notes. Representative Bera had a last-minute member meeting conflict, but was gracious enough to record opening remarks, which we will play for you shortly. And Dr. Adam Resnick from Children's Brain Tumor Network is dealing with a family emergency and will not be able to speak, but we know his friends, Dr. Prados and Margol, will be able to explain CBTN's important role in this initiative. Before we start, we would like to go over some housekeeping for today's event. Today's town hall is scheduled to last approximately 75 minutes. You are muted for this town hall and your video is disabled. To ask questions during this town hall, please type your questions into the Q&A feature found at the bottom of the Zoom window. We will answer as many questions as possible after the panel discussion. The town hall will be recorded and available for later viewing at curethekids.org/webinars. Now let's kick things off with a message from the bill's author, Representative Ami Bera.
Hi, I'm Congressman Ami Bera, Dr. Ami Bera. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Childhood Cancer Caucus, and I want to thank the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation for helping put together this town hall. It's incredibly important information. You'll talk about the data for the Pediatric Brain Cancer Act, which will help identify potential uses for real-world registries and clinical trial design. I want to thank my staff that's going to be on the town hall, along with those out of the research academic community to answer your questions about what this act does, how it'll help us find better diagnostics and better therapeutics, and one day cure pediatric brain cancers. So thank you for participating. Thank you to the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation, and let's have a great town hall.
Thank you, Representative Bera, for leading the effort down in Washington, D.C. Our first two speakers were crucial in making this bill a reality. Beyond their work on this legislation, they have dedicated their lives to finding better treatments for patients diagnosed with pediatric brain tumors. I'd like to welcome Drs. Margol and Prados to discuss the important work of the Pediatric Neuro-Oncology Consortium and how this legislation will affect their efforts.
So I think my name is Mike Prados. I'm a neuro-oncologist from UC San Francisco, having spent close to 40 years now in the field, trying to do the best that we can to change outcome, both in adults and pediatrics, but in particular for the very rare pediatric brain cancers that we see. And I'm going to kind of put on my teacher's hat for a second, because I think it's important to have a little bit of definition about what we're going to talk about and bring that into the context that Dr. Margol will talk about following this. So for some of you, you're very conversant with clinical trial design, but I think very briefly, traditionally, based on consensus and the FDA requirements, we do trials to first define safety. We call those phase 1, and then we do some smaller sample size trials called phase 2 to see if we get a signal of benefit in a certain patient population. And then if we get really excited, then we want to try and decide if in fact the therapy that we're testing actually makes a difference, and that's called a phase 3 study. And phase 3 studies in general are randomized. So we take the new therapy and compare it head to head against a contemporary control group. And sometimes that means a standard of care group, sometimes it means a placebo. And what happens is that patients enter the trial and they get randomized, like a flip of a coin. Either you get the new therapy or you don't. And then we compare the results. And the reason that that's been a tradition and a kind of a priority from the FDA standpoint is that it reduces bias. It helps us to truly understand the significance of the findings and the endpoints, and can help us statistically say with some certainty that the therapy is truly better compared to children who don't get the new therapy. So what's the problem there? I think if we're talking about breast, lung, colon, prostate cancer, you have hundreds of thousands of patients in the country who can participate in these trials and finish them in a very short period of time, within a year or 2 years, for instance. If we take ATRT as an example, because that's critical to this discussion, we're talking about an incredibly rare patient population, thank goodness, of 50 to 70 patients per year, just say in the United States. Statistically, if you wanted to do a clinical trial where you randomized, it would take many years to do that. And I want to give you an example. The first really dedicated ATRT clinical trial through the Children's Oncology Group, ACNS 0333 is the name of it, was probably conceived, I would say, in 2007. And the first enrollment was in 2009. It takes time to get a trial up and running. It took about 4 years to enroll, 5 years to enroll. The data was then analyzed several years later and then published in 2020. So the first enrollment was 2009, the publication was 2020. So we're talking about 11 years, maybe 13 or 14 years. And that was in a non-randomized trial. So without a true comparison, except what we call historical controls. So it wasn't even designed to assess whether the therapy was better than historical therapies. It was only designed to get information in patients who were uniformly treated about outcomes relative to a treatment. So when you think about 13, 14, or 15 years of a trial to get to an endpoint where we're still not certain whether the therapy was better for, and in fact, over the course of the trial, new biologic data was acquired that even in the design originally, we didn't understand that there were subgroups of these patients. So let's start thinking about what that means. If we know what we know now and we designed it back then, we would have to probably double or triple the accrual, which was 65 patients. It might take instead of 4 years, 8 to 10 years to do that trial. We still wouldn't get the information that we wanted because we wouldn't have randomized patients into the study. And now we're still struggling with, well, what did we learn? We learned a lot, but was it enough? Was it enough to make a difference in making a decision about the treatment? So at the end of that trial, which was an amazing trial, we still don't know the best therapy. We still don't know the best timing for radiation, or if we even should use radiation therapy. We still don't know which patients might do better than others based on subgroup analysis. And we know now that there are 3 groups of ATRT and more to come, no question. And so we're left hanging with what do we do with this information that took us a decade and a half to come to. So that's where we come into the idea here now of external controls. And I want to give you kind of a definition of what external controls. External controls are very simply information about a population of patients that would mimic completely the therapeutic trial that you want to do. And there's some 3 C's I want you to think about. And this is based on FDA guidance. One is that the data, patient level data, has to be contemporary because we know things change over time in terms of patient management and care. So contemporary patients, if we want to find information about ATRT patients, it should be probably over the last 8 or 10 years of information that we would gather. So it'd be contemporary. It also has to be very complete. So we have to know exactly what it is that we're looking for. So patient demographic, age, sex, those are very basic things, but we also need to know genomics. We need to know the subtypes. We need to know the staging. We need to know how they were treated, how long they were treated, what the endpoints were, when the imaging was done, et cetera, what all concomitant meds they were on, how the endpoints were assessed, was there central review, all of those kinds of things. And then they have to be comparable. So that's the third C, right? Contemporary, complete, and comparable. So if we're going to do a clinical trial today, and we're going to do a single-arm study, the patients that we enroll in that single-arm study have to be matched to that external control, point by point. It's as if they truly existed to be randomized to that patient. And there's got to be sufficient numbers. We know that it may not be just one-to-one comparison. It may take 4 patients or 5 patients to every patient that we treat on the clinical trial. But let's think about that, because if we could amass in a registry sufficient contemporary, complete, and comparable numbers of patients that were treated in the past that linked directly to the therapy that we were going to do, we could probably finish a trial in 1 year as opposed to 10 years, 15 years, which is really important. It's really critical. But there's a huge amount of data and detail that's important in order to get to that point, to where we could truly use external controls. And the only way that we can do that is to develop a registry. So the registry that Ashley will talk about, that is developed through the Pediatric Neuro-Oncology Consortium, PNOC, in collaboration with our great colleagues at the Children's Brain Tumor Network, will gather the information that is contemporary, complete, and comparable to therapies that we're going to start to design and are actually designing now for intervention. There are registries that are out there. They are wonderful, but they're totally incomplete in all of the details that I've just kind of mentioned. They don't have, for instance, all of the imaging. They don't have all the genomics. They don't have all the information about why a patient stopped treatment or didn't stop treatment. They don't know when the scans were done and how those scans were characterized and centrally reviewed. So to put together that kind of information, which currently does not exist, to put that kind of information, to fill in the blanks, if you want to think about it, takes a huge amount of time, effort, and resources, and patient and family engagement to get that information from all of those children, whether they're alive or not today, that can inform and help us develop the most appropriate, sophisticated clinical trial going forward that we can complete in a short period of time to find an answer, to say yes or no, to give us that go, no-go decision so that we're not wasting patients' lives, time, and effort in order to come to those kinds of conclusions. So the genesis of this is basically the rationale that we can't do things like we've done in the past. We have to move faster, quicker. We have to get to those go, no-go decisions as quickly as we can. And we've got to be able to do that in a living document kind of way. So every registry patient that gets into this system continues to inform trials as we go forward, because as we gain new information, we can go back and extract that information from that patient registry to inform a new trial. So I would envision over a very short period of time, hopefully we get this funded through this congressional effort, that we will have the opportunity to do this with ATRT. But ATRT is only a proof of concept, right? We want to do this for ETMR, for choroid plexus carcinoma, for rare subgroups of medulloblastoma, low-grade glioma, et cetera. Clinical trials of the future in rare cancers in children, at least brain or otherwise, but in our effort, brain, are going to change. And if we do it right, we do it carefully, we do it comprehensively, then pharma will get engaged, FDA will be engaged, families will be engaged. We won't have to be randomizing patients to a standard of care that doesn't work. And then we can move forward and help the next generation of studies as they move forward as well. So I hope that helps, right? This is critical. This is really critical. We can't do things like we've done in the past. It makes no sense. Make no sense from a time standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, and patients and families don't want that. We don't want that as researchers going forward. So I'm going to kind of leave it there with those definitions. I want you to keep that in mind. And I'll turn it over to Ashley to kind of talk about taking that idea of the vision of external controls into something that can be implemented and translated into something that's a real living thing. So Ashley, maybe you could move forward.
Sure. Thanks so much, Mike. So I'm gonna take some time just to kind of let you know how we got here. Thank you, Mike, for kind of outlining why we need to be here and kind of a lot of the impetus for this. But PNOC is organized. We have working groups, and a big part of our working groups in PNOC involve the participation of parent advocates, caregiver advocates. And we started this conversation, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, with a group of parent advocates kind of brainstorming around how do we move forward with ETRT? What do we do next? How do we find new therapies and really improve survival? And we kind of scratched our heads because of what Mike alluded to, which was that even after the large COG trial, ACNS 0333, there was still a lot of unanswered questions. And we felt like we really needed to get to the bottom of those questions before we could move on. So the idea of the registry actually started with us just saying we need more information. You know, there are only 65 kids involved, you know, in this study, but we know that there are a number of other patients out there, and it's really unfortunate that we don't have their data. We could know so much more. We could learn so much more if we had a way of capturing data from all of these patients, not just the ones that had been enrolled on the study, which Mike mentioned had been closed for quite a number of years. So we started kind of thinking about how we would do this. And around the same time, David Ahrens from the National Brain Tumor Society reached out to Mike, who then reached out to me to co-chair a research roundtable. And the topic was external control cohorts. And so Mike and I started like studying furiously about external control cohorts. And we had this really fantastic, I'll say, meeting of the minds with a lot of really amazing, smart people, including colleagues from the FDA. And the conversation was how to implement external control cohorts in pediatric brain tumor clinical trials. And we ended up publishing a manuscript, which just came out in JCO a couple of weeks ago. And it really kind of gives a blueprint for how to do this. As Mike mentioned, you know, obviously, standard randomized control clinical trials have been the gold standard, but we recognize as a community that there are cases where that's not feasible and honestly, sometimes not ethical. And so we need to think of different ways of doing it. So these kind of two things were happening at the same time. We were thinking about how we could build this registry just to get more information. And then Mike and I all of a sudden became experts in external control cohorts. And we then said, you know what, rather than building this registry, you know, with a limited number of data elements to answer some questions, why don't we build it very intentionally so that we could use this one day as an external control cohort? And kind of around that same time, we also started to realize that this also gave us an avenue for advocacy. So we could bring awareness to this idea. And kind of thinking about the fact that we were going to need significantly more resources, we kind of went the legislative route. So I say significantly more resources, again, to do this the right way. Again, to go back to what Mike said, you know, we really have to have a complete data set. And that's really labor intensive and resource intensive. So to get all of these images from all of these patients, to get all of the detailed information that we need, meant that the trial was going to cost us a lot more, to be honest, than we had originally budgeted for. And we've been really fortunate through PNOC to have a lot of support from philanthropic partners, including many of you. Our parent advocacy group has raised a lot of money to support this registry. We've gotten support from Team Beans and others, but we recognize that that was just not going to be enough. So we powwowed a little bit and thought, okay, maybe we could see if we could ask Congress for some money. And so we initially set out on a mission with the help of Representative Susan Wild, and we had an appropriations request back in 2022. And we were really excited that we had a bipartisan letter of support signed by Congressman Bera and others. And we realized, oh, people are interested in this. Like legislators are interested in hearing about this cause. They're supportive. And while the appropriations route turned out not to be, I think, the right fit for this, we didn't want to kind of give up, because we realized that, in our meetings with members, not only were they willing to support us from a financial standpoint, but they were really just supportive of our cause in general. So we thought we would kind of go back and see if there was another way that we could do this. And so Mike and I went back to the Hill in July and met with several offices, including a meeting with Harsh and Representative Bera's office. And obviously that meeting went really well, and we're very, very grateful that both of you were supportive of the cause and decided to introduce this bill along with Representative Kelly. So that's kind of how this whole thing came to be. I think that just to echo some of the points that Mike made, this bill is really meant to be a proof of concept. So a lot of people say, well, why are you starting with ATRT? And I think there's a number of reasons why. The first is that it's in desperate need of more information. Survival rates are still very suboptimal. And I think one of the most important things is we have this amazing parent organization, this amazing parent caregiver community who has really been there from the beginning and incredibly supportive. And the only way that this is going to be successful is with their participation. So I think that we're really well suited to be successful in this. And again, really just a proof of concept. We think if we can successfully do this, design this the right way, prove to the FDA that we can do this, then we could really change the way that clinical trials are designed, especially for rare diseases in the future. I will mention a couple of other things that I think are important points. Number one is that we actually did, Mike and I have now kind of come to know some of the members of the Oncology Center for Excellence through our work with MBTS and the joint manuscript that they were co-authors on. So kind of very early on in this process, we ran our registry by them. So we actually showed them the data elements to get their input. That's honestly when we realized that this was going to be a much larger project than we had initially anticipated. So we feel pretty good about the data elements that we have. Some other questions I know have come up around how does this registry differ from other registries that are out there? So for example, CCDI efforts, as well as things through like Project Every Child, MCI, et cetera, CBTN. So I'll say that we have met with the leadership from CCDI. They are trying to do efforts that are similar, but they're not quite as comprehensive as what we are doing. And the same will go for, if you think about like Project Every Child and MCI, it's not quite as comprehensive. And it's, when we looked at ATRT, so for example, I think through MCI, there have only been 30 ATRT patients who have been screened, mostly because you don't need the molecular characterization initiative to diagnose ATRT. So a lot of patients aren't enrolling on that. So from that perspective, this is more comprehensive than CCDI, but something that's super, super important is that we are going to share all of this information with CCDI and the larger community. So this is not instead of, this is alongside and very much integrated with CCDI. And the same thing goes for CBTN. So PNOC and CBTN are very intertwined.
Joined at the hip. Joined at the hip.
I'm like, what is the word? Yes,
I don't
very
know
much.
what that means.
If you can even be more than joined at the hip. But we actually meet with CBTN very regularly. They've been key in helping us think about a lot of things with the registry, especially logistics. So currently CBTN has a cohort of patients with ATRT. That cohort will actually be integrated directly into the registry. And so CBTN staff will be going back and gathering additional data points that weren't collected as part of the initial intake at CBTN. So those two cohorts will exist together, and we'll make sure that there is no overlap, and we have processes in place to make sure that if a patient was enrolled in CBTN, they're not dually enrolled in the registry, that would be one kind of case ID. And then a lot of the biospecimens are going to be stored over at CBTN, so that eventually all of this data will still be shared kind of in this federated space. Adam Resnick isn't here, so I had to say the word federated in his absence. But to make sure that this data, you know, this data is not for us, right? It's for everybody. We want this information out there. So as far as kind of making sure I touched on that point, that everybody kind of understands how these databases and efforts are all going to be very much complementary rather than competitive in any way, shape, or form.
I will mention that one of the other reasons is that we have the infrastructure and the opportunity to actually do this. And that's more, it seems intuitive to say that, but it's actually quite rare. Where PNOC has, 30 institutions or 20 or 30 institutions in the United States and Europe and India. Ashley and I are going to India in a couple of weeks to gather a global group of children, because it's not just US cases, right? It's ATRT cases, and they exist everywhere. And part of our vision, at least in PNOC and CBTN, is to find that information no matter where it is. The other thing about the registry is that we want to take information from patients who have been previously treated, whereas MCI and other efforts are from more newly diagnosed disease. And we know we don't want to wait for that, because it would take a really, really long time to get the numbers of cases that we would need. So the opportunity to interact with the CBTN, which has also a global footprint, with a therapeutic infrastructure like PNOC, which has a global footprint, and interact on a regular basis so that we can share data and we have common data elements in order to do that, to harmonize that information with the same vision to get to those points as quickly as possible. So everything kind of aligned, right, Ashley? Everything aligned at the right time. It's still taking too long. It's still driving us crazy to get over the finish line. But I think once we start, it's going to happen quickly, because we've had a lot of encouragement from the patient community, from all of the stakeholders, everybody who's involved, in order to create these external controls that will serve multiple clinical trials going forward. And we're just going to make a difference. I mean, we're going to make a significant difference. So we got to get over the line. We got to do it right, because we don't want to go back and say we wish we had have gotten something that we didn't get. And we're going to go fast right out of the gate, right? As soon as the trial opens, PNOC 30, that we will start entering data immediately. Our statisticians will start looking at it. And the first trial that we have designed through the ATRT working group, PNOC CBTN working group, will be a trial at the time of relapse, but we could inform that trial with an external control cohort if we can find those patients that match completely the patients that we're going to treat in that first therapeutic study. And then we're going to tell the whole world we did it, right? And we're going to show them that it's possible, and we're going to do it for ETMR and other diseases as well. So we're really anxious to get going. And we've already been working for, like Ashley has mentioned, for 2 or 3 years, setting this up. And we're ready to go.
You've referenced CBTN. Could you just briefly explain who the Children's Brain Tumor Network is and
yeah, it's an
about
amazing group. They started almost at the same time that PNOC started, about 10 or 11 years ago. And the vision was to become a biorepository. So in that context, they wanted to get information linked to tissue. So the idea was, if you put a lot of cases into one space, that you could do the profiling, the genetic interrogation of that, and then link it to some amount of patient data, and then make that information known to the community without walls. And so that's what they set out to do, is to create a huge biorepository of all pediatric brain cancers, but also other rare diseases, and put them in a data set that could be viewed and put out there essentially for researchers to say, well, I need 600 cases of low-grade glioma. Where am I going to find them? So CBTN has organized their efforts to get the tissue, the clinical outcomes, and to make that freely available for translational studies and clinical research studies. Non-clinical research studies. PNOC then married with them by saying, great, there's an amazing biorepository with bioinformatics, all kinds of data scientists and comprehensive systems in place to organize and view the information and the data and share it, which is also an important point, in order to match the clinical aspects of what are going on and to inform that bench to bedside, if you want to think about it. So CBTN has, as mentioned, a huge footprint in the United States, but also globally, and has systems in place to acquire the tissue, acquire the data, organize it, harmonize it, and then make it available for researchers. They've been amazing partners for not just PNOC, for other groups as well. And they have a strong link with the NCI to make sure the data, de-identified information is available in as rapid a period of time as possible.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank both of you, not only for your work on this bill, but for everything that you do for patient families. Our next speaker, speaking of patient families, is Rachel Kreiger. She's Ollie's mom and the founder of the nonprofit Ollie's Orchestra. Rachel is here to tell you a little bit about her family's journey and why this effort is important for her fellow brain tumor advocates. Rachel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So hello, hello, Congressmen Bera, Drs. Margol, Prados, Resnick, Mr. Patel, pediatric cancer advocates, and fellow pediatric cancer community members. Thank you to the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation for asking me to speak today on behalf of the pediatric oncology community regarding the critical importance of the data for Pediatric Brain Cancer Act of 2023. My name is Rachel Kreiger, and my 5.5-year-old son, Oliver, who we affectionately call Ollie, has been living with and fighting atypical teratoid rhabdoid tumor, or ATRT, for almost 5 years now. My husband, Max Horn, and I are also co-founders of Ollie's Orchestra, a nonprofit organization that provides musical instruments and musical education to children with cancer, as well as advocate and provide financial support for research for pediatric brain cancer. So on April 10th, 2019, my perception of the pediatric cancer community consisted of the few suspicious cases in my pediatric primary care nurse practitioner rotation, or the smiling bald children from the television commercials. On April 11th, 2019, my view of cancer was flipped upside down when Max and I became members of the pediatric oncology community as parents and caregivers. As we sat in the pediatric emergency room at New York University, we were shown an MRI image of Ollie's brain and the large tumor sitting in his cerebellum. In shock and horror, we could never have imagined that this would be the first of more than 100 times that we have seen images of Ollie's brain. We would later learn that this one tumor was blocking the flow of his cerebral spinal fluid and causing his only symptom, intractable vomiting, and was one of the many tumors that littered his brain and spine. The next morning, he had brain surgery to remove that one tumor, and 4 days later, we received the news that it was ATRT, a grade 4 malignant cancer of the brain and spine. That week, we made the decision to relocate to Boston and be treated under the care of Dr. Susan Chi at Boston Children's Hospital. As a parent and a clinician with a background in public health, I was shocked to learn two facts. One, that ATR was considered so rare, despite it being the most common CNS malignancy in infants under 1. And two, that pediatric cancer is the #1 cause of death by disease in children. In spite of these facts, frontline ATR treatment uses a combination of chemotherapies that were specifically created to treat mostly adult cancers. For pediatric brain cancer, the dosage must be so high as to not only penetrate the blood-brain barrier, but also to adjust for differences in metabolism. This means treatment for pediatric brain cancers like ATRT are significantly more toxic to children's bodies than to the adult bodies that it is used in. From there on, we discovered how little data and information there is to dictate which protocol to use, relying on our treating clinicians to educate us and recommend one. We also learned that no matter what we chose, the outcomes would be challenging and heart-wrenching, making the decision to even treat at all a very difficult one. Over the next 7 months, we followed the Dana-Farber protocol with adjustments made specifically for Ollie's aggressive case. In those first 130 days of treatment, with 87 consecutive overnight stays during his first rounds of chemotherapy, we saw our child and other children with cancer undergo some of the harshest, toxic, and frankly torturous treatments. There were many times I was not sure if we'd leave Boston with our child, and we know way too many families, fellow oncology families, who did not get to bring their children home. Ollie relapsed 9 months later with a new tumor in his brain. At this point, we were back in New York and on our way to permanently relocate to the Children's Hospital Philadelphia under the care of Dr. Jane Minturn. What was once again shocking to us is that once you get relapsed ATRT, there is no clear protocol or path forward. Someone from the pediatric cancer community once told us, just make the next best decision, because truly that is all we can do given the sparse information we have. Without a clear path forward, it's one decision at a time, and that is what we did and continue to do. Since Ollie's diagnosis, we have had many educated discussions with the dedicated clinicians on our teams and across the world, sifted through thousands of threads on the ATRT Facebook page, hoping to find a child or children that look like Ollie to decide what might be the best path forward. What I have learned and what we have learned from this is that it appears that there are no two ATRT patients. There are no two ATRT patients that are alike. Even if they have the same subtyping, treatment history, same age at diagnosis, we do not understand why some children's cancers respond to treatment and why others do not. Yet this cannot be true. There are answers in that data. Our children and their experiences provide extensive information that, when compiled, will allow clinicians, researchers, and families to make the most informed choices. As families, the best we can currently do are educated guesses, and that is not enough. This is why we need the registry. Upon relapse, Max and I worked with our incredible clinicians to come up with the plan that we felt most comfortable with. We moved forward with full brain and spine radiation when Ollie was 33 months old, knowing that this could be catastrophic in terms of survival, side effects, and development for a child of that age. Since then, Ollie has miraculously been stable. The images of his brain and spine show areas that could be scar tissue or dormant tumor. We are not sure, and we will not be sure until something does or does not change. Through those first 2 years during frontline treatment, as well as treatment for relapsed ATRT, We watched our Ollie endure medical complications that no parent or caregiver could ever want to imagine. Some of them include a septic reaction to apheresis from stem cell collection for his stem cell transplant, multiple bouts of bacterial meningitis, both of which required the sewing of a lumbar drain into Ollie's back, leakage of cerebral spinal fluid into the space between his skull and his forehead, hepatic sinusoidal obstruction syndrome, duodenal strictures likely caused by the aggressive treatment, countless fevers, infections, and internal bleeding that came out of his body in ways that we will never forget. We have met with hospice once when we thought that he was clearly dying. Ollie has experienced many wounds, many of which have healed, and as a family, we have experienced many wounds that will never heal. To say it has been heartbreaking would be a vast understatement. Ollie is now fed by a G-tube, is learning to walk with a walker, talks with signs, some verbal communication, and an assisted device, has hearing loss from the initial aggressive rounds of chemotherapy, has neuropathy from some of the drugs used, a seizure disorder, and cognitive and developmental delays. And yet, we are some of the lucky ones. Ollie is here. He fights every single day with a gorgeous and infectious smile and is the brightest spirit. He loves music, playing with his brothers and friends, and he loves his family. We are infinitely grateful. We know too many children that do not get the privilege of watching their child grow up. And this leads me to why we are here today, to advocate for the Data for Pediatric Brain Cancer Act of 2023. This legislation would help us to begin to understand the complexity of ATRT and find the commonalities among our children's cases to hopefully improve outcomes for our children. Because the truth is, we do not know why some of our children live and while others do not. We do not have an understanding of what will respond to treatment and what will not. Did we overtreat Ollie and cause too many harmful side effects? Did we undertreat him? Why does his cancer seemingly respond well to radiation when other children who had almost identical cases and have gotten the exact same treatment did not? So why is this registry not only important but necessary? One reason is we need to understand what the prognostic factors really are. Ollie's initial diagnosis in 2019 looked like he would not live to see the end of the year. Yet here he is 5 years later, thriving in ways we never could have imagined. And I am grateful for that every single day. But why? Having this information would help parents make this next best decision. Furthermore, despite the best efforts of clinicians, I'm so sorry, my screen just... Furthermore, despite the best efforts of clinicians and researchers using what they have to create the least harmful protocols for our children, we treat our kids with harsh, outdated, and toxic therapies. Having this data compiled into a registry would help researchers create that external cohort arm of a study that is so desperately needed to identify patterns and conduct rigorous research that will move the needle forward and identify these less toxic, more effective treatments for our children. In all areas of medicine, I have been trained to understand that evidence-based medicine, based on rigorous empirical studies, is the gold standard for care. Yet we just do not have enough data right now and evidence on rare diseases like ATRT. We need the registry to do this. I am grateful for Ollie's life every single day. He, like every child I have met along this journey, has shown me what true strength, bravery, compassion, forgiveness, and understanding looks like. The smiles in these photos on the slide that I've shared, just like the smiles on the television commercials, are a testament to his resilience and the resilience of other children fighting cancer. It is my greatest honor to advocate for them because the status quo is just not enough. Our children deserve a world where we can use the most up-to-date and relevant evidence to treat the #1 cause of death by disease, where we can both have better outcomes and preserve their quality of life. In an ideal world, no child will ever have to do what Ollie has done and continues to do, but we know more diagnoses will come each and every single day. 47 children in the United States will be diagnosed with cancer tomorrow and the next day, and the day after that, and their families will have to make impossible choices from there on out every single day. With the aid of the data compiled in this registry, they can make more informed choices while also helping to propel ATRT research forward. The registry will honor all of the children that have fought, are fighting, or will fight ATRT and other rare diseases. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I know, unfortunately, your experiences are shared experiences for a lot of the patient families on this phone call. but I think everything that you described really hammers home why this legislation is really important and why the work of those on this call are so important. Our final speaker before the Q&A session is Harsh Patel. Harsh is the Health Policy Advisor to Representative Ami Bera. Before joining Representative Bera's office, he started his career in Representative Bera's office. He started his career in Senator Chris Murphy's office as a legislative correspondent. He will explain the current state of the bill and the outlook for the legislation as we move into the rest of the year. Thank you for joining us, Harsh.
Thank you, Mike. First of all, I'd like to thank Rachel for sharing Ollie's story, and Dr. Margol and Prados for helping pave the way with their research for this. I can start off with kind of a brief recap of the bill, but for the data for Pediatric Brain Cancer Act ultimately would help identify potential uses of the external real world data that Dr. Prados talked about for clinical trial design, and it would require the FDA to kind of either develop and maintain or continue to develop and maintain a registry of this real world data with ATRT. Make sure they can consider new and innovative approaches and technology for this data collection, as the doctors mentioned, in terms of the intricacy of that data, and then continue to expand those activities and data collection to build this real world data infrastructure. Then finally, make sure that there's support for that data integration by mathematics and statistical analysis. So we've been fortunate enough to have bipartisan support, with Representative Kelly being a co-lead. And first of all, I would like to thank all of you here today and the support that you've given us in advocating for this bill. In terms of prospects, we're continuing to work with Drs. Margol and Prados on developing this bill and working with the FDA to make sure that we are moving forward in a very productive manner. And Mike, I can turn it over to you for questions, but just would love the support from the community. I think you might be on mute, Mike.
I'm sorry, are you asking me a question? Start again? Or Henry, Mike Henry? There's too many Mikes.
Sorry, I was muted there. Thank you, Harsh. If anybody on this call is looking for ways to get involved with this effort or any of the other advocacy efforts from the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation, I'd ask you to please use our website to sign up to be an advocate, or email our team directly at the address that you will see here in 1 second. We'd like to move on to answering some of the questions you both submitted before this event and some of the questions that I see coming in. A reminder, if you have questions for any of our attendees, please type your questions into the Q&A feature found at the bottom of the Zoom window. I'm going to start off our questions with one that came in from one of our registrants before the event. And it deals with the timeline. And if you could give us a sense, anybody that wants to answer, after this bill passes, what would the timeline for this effort be, whether it's funding in or when the data collection would start?
I can briefly start with that, but Ashley, maybe you can chime in. I think we're going to proceed forward without the legislation. We don't know that the legislation will be successful, but we can't wait. But in order for us to be more successful, we really need that legislation. And one thing that Rachel mentioned about the data, which I think is it's poignant. The data actually that we need is out there. It already exists. The question is, how do we get it into a way that's assembled? So through PNOC, the trial, we've started fundraising. We're going to start the process. We're going to start the registry. We don't have enough money to carry it forward more than maybe a year or a year and a half, but we can't wait, right? And as soon as that opens again through our IRB, we will formally consent and start to acquire the information. But like I said, it's gonna sustain us for a while, but not as long as we want, and may not give us as many cases as we want, but we're going to pursue this right away. Maybe Ashley, you could comment as well about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything else to say other than to echo that. I mean, we feel really strongly that this needs to happen. We're gonna scrap together what we can. And again, our PNOC Foundation and our parent advocates have done an amazing job from a grassroots effort to get us money to start off. And so we're gonna put that money to good use. The registry is almost approved to the UCSF IRB, and then it will go to the IRB at CHLA. CHLA, Children's Hospital Los Angeles, will be kind of the coordinating site for patients who are treated at non-PNOC institutions. So this is going to be open to everybody, and we'll have contact information to allow registration through CHLA. But I don't know, Harsh, how you feel about potential timelines from the legislative angle.
Obviously can't make any promises there in terms of legislative angle, but I will clarify that in drafting the text, we did make sure to incorporate that. When this were to get passed, it would allow FDA the ability to continue to develop and maintain registries that are already pre-existing. So for ATRT, so this will definitely not like your work that you are starting as soon as you can. Obviously will continue to be helpful.
I will say, again, the CBTN has a cohort of patients already, a little over 120, and with incomplete data. But as soon as the registry opens through the IRB, those cases will become the immediate early enrollments. And Ashley and her group is already soliciting families who are poised and ready to start gathering the data. So if you're a family member and you're interested and you know that your child has data, you can start gathering the information if you contact Ashley's group. And maybe Ashley, you can mention how that works to kind of get preemptively the information that can then be ultimately formally put into the registry. We're going to need 400 or 500 patients in order to find, let's say, 50 or 60 that would match our first trial. Like Rachel mentioned, who are specifically and exactly the same as the kinds of new children that we'll treat, but it's going to take a while. But there is a process in place.
Just like to ask this question because I've seen it come in a few times. How does this initiative tie up with other programs like Kids First, which I know CBTN is very involved in? Does it have provisions for other data registries to collaborate?
You want to take that, Ashley?
Sure. So yes, this is going, again, the goal is to share this across, all interested parties. So we will be collaborating with Kids First. It will tie into CCDI. All of these, the data will be quarantined as it needs to be for data standards, right? So we will have to make sure that the data is clean, accurate, et cetera, but it will be released to tie into Kids First, to tie into CCDI. And then I was looking in the chat, I saw someone else asked about I think Rare Brain Tumor Registry from Sick Kids too, so I can touch on that while I'm talking about this. So Sick Kids, Annie Wong, who's an amazing ATRT researcher and colleague, has the Rare Brain Tumor Registry through Sick Kids. It's a great resource. Again, there are registries that exist, to people's questions, that this is true. The problem is that they were all designed for different purposes, and they have all done phenomenal things. So Dr. Wong's work with the Rare Brain Tumor Registry was really what led us to understand that there are different molecular subgroups, right? So that very important work. We're not those registries aren't poised to serve as external control cohorts. So that's kind of where we need to focus on what the difference is. So when we met with FDA and we have these conversations around what is going to be useful going forward, what data do we need to really interrogate some of these more specific questions? That's where, if we think about here's kind of where the rare brain tumor registry lives and kind of where CBTN lives, what we need is a level of data that's more up here. And it's really hard to go back and get that data. CBTN, like I said, has a provision that allows us to go back so we can fill in what we're calling the delta between what this registry needs and what's already been collected for CBTN, but kind of the threshold is that much higher. And that's why this is so much more resource intense, right? The data that we could collect from, previously in a lot of these other registries wasn't not that intense. But when we're talking about asking for dates of medication administration, doses of medication administration, concomitant medications that patients were taking while they were getting therapy, I mean, this is a whole new set of information that we're being required, and we should be collecting. And that's why there really isn't anything that's been done like this before. So yes, there are registries that have existed. Absolutely. Are there ones that have been developed with this level of detail? No. So that's, I think, a really important difference to point out.
And I want to emphasize what Rachel brought up as well, is that we want to understand the toxicities of those therapies as well, late effects, and social determinants that may define how some kids do better than others, and the equity involved with it. The FDA wants us to know about those things, not just zip codes where kids live, but how they are living, because that helps to inform the impact of the therapy and also the endpoints of that therapy, because some children may drop out of a trial earlier and we don't know why. But we need to know why, because that therapy may have been important, but we don't know why it wasn't. So there's not a single registry that is collecting that kind of information that can serve uniquely as an external control cohort that's comprehensive, contemporary, and complete. That's what we're building, that we'll share, of course.
And I think this is a great example of collaboration, and I think it should give some hope to families that would love to see collaboration in this field. It's out there, it's happening. I have two questions, one for Harsh and one for Rachel. First, Harsh, why is it important for congressional staffers like yourself to hear from family members or clinicians or patients that have been affected by pediatric cancer? And then for you, Rachel, when you share Ollie's story, what do you want folks like Representative Bera and his staff to take away from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it obviously makes a huge difference, right? Understanding the real world impacts of ATRT and the illness, and like we're also in a special role with where Representative Bera is also positioned by training, and so he obviously gets a lot of the details and intricacies of this a lot more than other members of the Congress. So again, hearing those stories and how it touched Rachel and her family and the other patient advocates on this call makes a huge difference, especially to members that aren't as keyed in on the intricacies of clinical trial design and just healthcare in general.
That's also a great question. I think that even if ATRT is, considered rare, the experience that we as parents and caregivers go through is not rare. And, utilizing a registry like this would really help, not only ATRT, but all of the families who experience rare, complex medical conditions, and amplifying our voices and, continuing to amplify our voices and our children's voices and dedicating funding for them. I think is the biggest takeaway, is that these, our experiences are one of many, 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 many experiences of people going through things like this, and, continuing to amplify our voices and dedicate the funding is what we really need. So thank you.
It's well said. I think so many people on this call have experienced a lot of the same things and can certainly relate to what you've gone through. I do want to ask, Harsh, what's the outlook for the bill moving forward, and what are some potential challenges that you see for this bill? And then lastly, if you could just tell us, how can advocates best support your office as this bill moves forward?
Yeah, so from our perspective, in Dr. Bera's office, I think for us, it's continuing to raise awareness and having support from the community and you all. And the best thing that you all can do is continue to go to your members of Congress and flag this legislation, because as we continue to have these discussions with the experts and the researchers in the community and the FDA and try to make this come to fruition, it always helps to have a vast group of members of Congress that are supportive. We'd love to have this introduced in the Senate as well and have Senate lead and champion. So again, all that comes down to patient advocacy, spread the word and make sure that they're able to share their story.
Thank you. I had an interesting question come in, and I hope that Dr. Prados or Margol can answer this. Do you have any advice for clinicians that are looking, or medical professionals that are looking to get involved in advocacy, and where can they jump in?
I think Ashley's the expert now with advocacy on the Hill, so I'll let her take that one. Interesting question.
It's a great question. I think I'll start off by saying I don't think there's enough of us in advocacy, which is why you have to ask this question. Otherwise, it would be really clear. I think there's some amazing organizations out there, like PBTF, obviously, that focuses a lot on, parents and caregivers. Society of Neuro-Oncology does have a public policy committee that Mike and I both serve on, which is nice because it does kind of have a more like clinician focus. So, we see things a little bit differently. NBTS also obviously is a big organization with a lot of advocacy angles. But I think if it's a purely, if you're coming from the pure clinician angles, probably SNO is a good place to start. But I am glad people are asking. I think we need to do a better job, and I wish there was a really clear answer for you, but we don't have that established yet. Maybe we will in the future.
I think one comment I'd make is that sometimes there's a lot of voices and they get diluted out because they're all coming from a different perspective. And having a unifying voice obviously sometimes is more powerful than a lot of disparate voices coming in without a singular vision or a singular focus, which we're trying to do, right? We're trying to keep things as focused as we can without a lot of signal to noise, kind of a technical noise, but we want to keep things very focused. And I think the society is one way. I agree. The Society of Neuro-Oncology is that voice for us, and we can link with other groups like ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, and other groups like that from the clinician side. But I think our greatest voice is from the families, and I just think they resonate much more significantly than a letter that's coming from SNO, right? So I that's the personal voice that actually makes the difference and resonates more than anything, I think, in my opinion.
And I will say, you mentioned some of the groups that we collaborate with. There are fantastic organizations, clinician organizations that are members of the Alliance for Childhood Cancer, along with PBTF. And it's very encouraging when parents go out to these Hill days and they have clinicians alongside them that can speak to the challenges that they're seeing within the clinic, or researchers' challenges that they're seeing for funding. So if you want to get involved, I'd encourage you to reach out to us, and we can help connect you to those advocacy efforts. I do have another question for Rachel. We have, I'm sure, advocates here that are trying out advocacy for the first time. Do you have any advice for them? Anybody that's considering talking about their or sharing their story for the first time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of, part of your story is that that's how we advocate for our children. Our story is our story, and it's unique to us, but not necessarily unique within the collective. And I think we can, in many ways, it's, to echo what Doctors Margol and Prados were saying, is that it's, sometimes as necessary as rigorous scientific data, because we've lived the experience, we live the experience. We see the harsh realities day in and day out of what the treatment is. And, I think telling our piece is so important, because it's the way to advocate forward for your child. And we are their voices. I mean, Ollie was diagnosed at 9 months old, and it would be an honor if I could be his voice every day for the rest of my life.
Thank you. I think that's helpful for some of the patient families that are on this phone call. I saw a question come in here in the chat to the doctors here. This is from a fellow bereaved ETMR parent. Are there any drawbacks to what you are doing or what you are trying to do? And why does this registry not already exist? Well, I mean, it does in some form, but why does this type of funding not already exist?
Well, I can get on a soapbox about this. I mean, I think that there's always been this discordance between funding for pediatric cancer in general versus adults. But just let me say, all cancers deserve funding. And it's a question of priorities, right? And you can make all kinds of statements about years of life lost, et cetera, but the fact is that there just is not enough funding that's coming from the NIH and the NCI, or necessarily from philanthropy, that can support the required effort that's needed. And it really, in order for young investigators, like I'm old, I'm on my way out, but for like Ashley and her group, for them to have support to do the kind of work that this entails year after year means actual money, right? So the problem has always been a lack of resources, not a lack of interest or desire or effort on the part of pediatric oncologists, but you've got to pay the bills somehow or another. At some point in time, you got to pay for the work. And we work pretty cheaply, but the point being is there's always been this discordance. The priorities never mesh. And of course we're biased, right? But it's actually true. If you put dollars for years of life lost, we get the short end of that funding source. And that actually maybe is some language that you can use when you advocate to Congress and your local representatives. Why is that? What's the reason for that? And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, but the single reason that we don't have an ETMR registry that's as comprehensive, and we're trying to develop that in PNOC, in fact, we're working on that, is that we don't have the money. And we only have 1 or 2 physicians who actually we can fund in order to do that, when it takes a legion of people to do that kind of work as well, right? So the truth is, it takes money. That's the bottom line. I mean, we can keep working our tushes off, but it takes money at some point. Got to pay for.
And it takes
pay for what we're doing. Huh?
Takes the effort of advocates, and I think that's a great lead into plugging our advocacy work and the follow-up to this event, because this is just the start. This is hopefully was informational for everybody that joined, but this is just the first step, and we will be following up with advocacy efforts and encourage you to reach out to us, learn how you can get involved. Most importantly, if you are a family that is attending that needs support, I'd encourage you to reach out to us outside of just our advocacy efforts, no matter where you are in your journey. If our patient family advocacy team can help you, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. And of course, you can sign up to be an advocate to make sure that you're following along with our updates at curethekids.org/advocate. I just want to thank you for attending today's town hall event. I want to thank our speakers again for sharing their time and their expertise. If you want to learn more about anything discussed here, including initiatives at PNOC, please, again, reach out to our team and we can help you. I'm just going to thank all of you, but especially Rachel, for sharing your story, and just know that all of us are thinking about you and Ollie moving forward. So thank you for attending, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Bye.
You.